Picture this. It's 1925, and a young woman sits in a doctor's office. Her jaw literally glowing green in the dark. Not metaphorically, literally glowing. The bones in her face are disintegrating, her teeth are falling out one by one, and when she opens her mouth, an eerie luminescence emanates from within. The doctor stares in horror, because he's never seen anything like this before. Neither has anyone else. But I have to tell you, this woman's condition wasn't caused by some mysterious disease or supernatural curse. It was caused by her job. A job that was supposed to make her beautiful, wealthy, and modern. A job that thousands of young women across America were desperate to get. Welcome back to another journey into the shadows of history. I'm here to tell you about one of the most chilling examples of corporate negligence and scientific ignorance in American history. A story that fundamentally changed how we think about worker safety, women's rights, and the price of progress. We need to travel back to the early 1900s, to an America drunk on the promise of science and technology. The discovery of radium by Marie and Pierre Curie in 1898 had captured the world's imagination. This mysterious, glowing element seemed almost magical. It could make things glow in the dark. It supposedly had healing properties, and it represented the cutting edge of modern science. By the 1910s, radium had become the miracle substance of the age. It was added to everything from toothpaste to chocolate, marketed as a health tonic that could cure everything from arthritis to impotence. The wealthy paid enormous sums for radium water, believing it would grant them vitality and longevity. Radium became synonymous with luxury, health, and modernity. But here's what makes this story so particularly devastating. The radium industry's most profitable application wasn't in medicine or luxury goods. It was in something far more mundane. Painting watch dials so they would glow in the dark. And the people hired to do this delicate, precise work weren't experienced craftsmen or scientists. They were young women, mostly teenagers, and women in their early 20s, hired because their small hands were considered perfect for the intricate work. These weren't just any young women. They were often the daughters of immigrants, working class, families who saw these jobs as golden opportunities. The pay was excellent, sometimes 3 times what they could earn in a factory or as a domestic servant. The work was clean, respectable, and performed in what appeared to be modern, scientific facilities. The largest of these facilities was operated by the United States Radium Corporation in Orange, New Jersey. Here, in a bright, airy factory that looked more like a modern office than an industrial workplace, hundreds of young women sat at tables, carefully painting numbers and hands on watch dials with luminous paint. The paint contained radium mixed with a phosphorescent powder and a glue-like adhesive. The work required extraordinary precision. Each number had to be painted with a tiny brush, and the lines had to be perfect. The supervisors taught the women a technique that would make their work faster and more accurate. They were instructed to point their brushes with their lips. Lip, dip, paint, they were told. Put the brush to your lips to create a fine point. Dip it in the radium paint, then paint the dial. The women were told the paint was harmless. In fact, they were told it was beneficial, that the radium would give them energy and make their skin glow with health and beauty. Some of the women, enchanted by the magical glow of the paint, would deliberately paint their nails, their teeth, even their faces with it for parties. They called themselves the Ghost Girls because they would glow softly in the dark as they walked home from work, taught Catherine. Shaub was 17 when she started working at the factory in 1917. She was bright, ambitious, and saw the job as her path to independence. Grace Fryer, 19, came from a family of Irish immigrants and was thrilled to find work that paid so well and seemed so respectable. Edna Bowles Hussman was just 14 when she started, lying about her age to get hired. For several years, these women lived what seemed like charmed lives. They earned good money. They were proud of their contribution to the war effort. Glowing watch dials were essential for soldiers in the trenches, and they genuinely enjoyed their work. The atmosphere in the factory was almost festive. The women would often glow softly as they walked home, and their boyfriends and husbands thought it was charming and romantic. But by the early 1920s, something began to go terribly wrong. It started with toothaches. Catherine Schaub's teeth began to loosen and fall out. Grace Fryer developed painful abscesses in her jaw. Other workers complained of fatigue, anemia, and bone pain. When they went to doctors, they were often told they had common ailments: bad teeth, overwork, or female hysteria. But the symptoms got worse. Much worse. Women's jaws began to literally crumble. Their bones became so brittle that some fractured their spines simply by sneezing. The radium had settled in their bones, continuously emitting radiation and destroying their bodies from the inside. Their breath glowed green in the dark. When dentists extracted their teeth, the empty sockets glowed like tiny green lanterns. Grace Fryer's jaw became so damaged that her dentist could lift out entire pieces of bone with his fingers. Catherine Schaub lost all her teeth, and her jaw was partially removed. Edna Bowles Hussman's leg broke spontaneously while she was dancing at her wedding reception. The most horrifying case was Molly Maguire, one of the first dial painters. By 1922, her entire jaw had to be removed. When she died in 1922, the official cause of death was listed as syphilis, a deliberate attempt to shame her and her family into silence. But when her body was exhumed years later for legal purposes, her bones were still radioactive. Her remains literally glowed in the dark. What makes this story even more devastating is that the executives and scientists at United States Radium Corporation knew about the dangers. They knew because they themselves took elaborate precautions when handling radium. They used lead screens, tongs, and masks. They never touched the substance directly, but they told their workers, these young women, that it was safe enough to put in their mouths. When the women began to get sick, the company's response was swift and ruthless. They hired private investigators to dig up dirt on the women's personal lives. They spread rumors that the women were suffering from sexually transmitted diseases. They denied any connection between the work and the illnesses. They even hired fake doctors to examine the women and declare them perfectly healthy. But here's the twist that makes this story even more chilling and reveals just how deliberate this cover-up was. The United States Radium Corporation wasn't just negligent. They weren't just ignorant. They were conducting what amounted to a secret human experiment, and they knew exactly what they were doing. I discovered documents that show the company had been conducting studies on the health effects of radium exposure as early as 1925. They knew their workers were dying. They knew the radium was the cause. But instead of protecting their workers, they saw an opportunity. They began secretly studying the women without their knowledge or consent. Company doctors would examine the women under the pretense of providing medical care, but they were actually documenting the progression of radium poisoning for research purposes. These women weren't just workers. They were unwitting test subjects in one of the most unethical medical experiments in American history. The company even published scientific papers based on their observations of the dying women, all while publicly denying any connection between radium and their workers' illnesses. They were literally profiting from their workers' deaths, twice, once from their labor, and again from the scientific data their suffering provided. When Grace Fryer finally found a lawyer willing to take her case in 1927, it took her years to find one because the United States Radium Corporation was so powerful. The company's legal strategy was to delay the case until the women died. Their lawyers filed motion after motion, appeal after appeal, hoping that time would solve their problem by eliminating the witnesses, and their strategy almost worked. By the time the case came to trial, many of the women were too sick to attend court. Grace Fryer had to be carried into the courtroom. Catherine Schaub could barely speak because of the damage to her jaw. But these women fought back with a courage that still takes my breath away. They knew they were dying. They knew they probably wouldn't live to see justice. But they were determined to prevent other women from suffering the same fate. The Radium Girls case was eventually settled out of court in 1928. The women received modest financial settlements, but more importantly, their courage led to the establishment of workers' rights to sue employers for industrial diseases. Their case became the foundation for modern occupational health and safety regulations. But as I researched this story, I kept coming back to one haunting question. How many young women had to die before we learned that profit should never come before human life? The Radium Girls were told they were lucky to have such modern, clean, well-paying jobs. They were told they were contributing to scientific progress and national defense. They were told that the very substance that was killing them was actually making them healthier and more beautiful, and they believed it because they trusted the authority figures in their lives, their employers, their doctors, their government. They trusted that the adults in charge would never knowingly put them in harm's way for the sake of profit. That trust was betrayed in the most fundamental way possible. What makes this story so relevant today is that it forces us to ask, what are we being told is safe today that future generations will look back on with horror? What modern industries are prioritizing profit over human health while wrapping their practices in the language of science and progress? The Radium Girls story isn't just about radium or watch factories or the 1920s. It's about power, trust, and the price we pay when we fail to question authority. It's about young women who were seen as disposable by the men who employed them, and who found the strength to fight back even as their bodies were literally disintegrating. Their glowing bones became a beacon of justice that still lights our way today. What do you think? In the comments below, tell me, what modern practices do you think future generations will judge as harshly as we now judge the radium industry? And how can we better protect workers and consumers from the next miracle substance that turns out to be deadly? I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore another hidden chapter of history that will change the way you see the world around you. And remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.